Why is this Terry McLaurin contract such a big deal for the Washington Commanders, and why has it been so hard to get done? Let's take a look at the numbers. Let's go. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Ref the District's Numbers Game, a new segment here that I'll be bringing some of my nerdy stats and spreadsheets here for you to enjoy here on Ref the District. First up, it's this man right here in the contract. Will he, won't he? As of this recording, he has not signed a contract, but we can break down some of those numbers in case he would sign a contract here later on. It has been a big deal in Washington, and I know some people are very sick and tired of hearing it, but give me a chance to kind of break down and take a look at some of these numbers in maybe a different way. And of course, make sure you hit that like button for me, subscribe to the channel, and join us on Wednesday, where we'll stream live at 7:30 Eastern right here on YouTube. Now, the first thing that we have to answer is kind of whether or not Terry McLaurin is even worth the contract. Now, there's a lot of conversation where people are starting to side with Trev on this, and you can side with him again on Wednesday, where he's not a true number one. He's only number one here in Washington, and he'd be a number two elsewhere. Well, you got Cortland Sutton, who just got paid a little bit more than what Terry McLaurin is, but that is a guy who has one more year and has been really a wide receiver too out there in Denver. Terry McLaurin has been wide receiver one here in Washington, and since he joined the league, he's actually in the top 10 when it comes to yards, games played, and number of targets, and even his average per reception is even in the top 10. This is not a guy who's been a slouch. While he lacks that explosiveness, and he is not in the top 25 when it comes to the most receiving yards by the age of 30, he's really not that far off. Sean Jackson, by the way, coming in at 25 with 8,399. So it may be a couple thousand yards off of that. But what he's brought to the game is consistency. And especially when you consider he has been Washington's number one wide receiver. Look at this number here, where he compares to the likes of Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, just behind A.J. Brown. This right here is the percentage of the yards that Terry McLaurin represents for this offense. So 27% here for Terry McLaurin. Like I said, just under A.J. Brown. I think his rounded to 26 plus for Terry McLaurin. A.J. Brown was just over 27. This is how much Terry McLaurin means to this organization. Now, there's a lot of talk also about how it's not about what he's done, right? It is about what we think he'll do. There's this mythical wide receiver over 30, monstrosity narrative that is going around right now. And to me, it seems a little strange because there have been productive wide receivers over the age of 30. Now, some recency bias will show you that it hasn't really worked out for wide receivers who some would say are better than Terry McLaurin. Antonio Brown, rather, signed for 4 years, $68 million back in 2017. He was traded 2 years later. Adam Thielen, 4 years, $64 million in 2019. No 1,000-yard seasons during the deal and released in 2023. Julio Jones, 3 years, $66 million in 2019. His last 1,000-yard receiving yard was in 2019 and traded to the Titans by the end of that deal. Tyler Lockett, 4 years, 69 and 21. He has 63.3 receiving yards per game under that contract. That's a drop from what it was before. That's an increase to what it was prior. And then he restructured and released in the final year of his deal. Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill even didn't get 1,000 yards in his year 30. These are all fantastic wide receivers. And yes, there is arguments that these guys are better. And some of those names did find their way onto the wide receivers, most receiving yards before the age of 30. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting about that list is when you go to the most receiving yards after the age of 30, it's a completely different list. There's not a lot of people married on there. Like Larry Fitzgerald, I think, is one of the few names that is somebody. But you do have guys like Travis Kelsey and Reggie Wayne who are recent, receiving tight end in case of Travis Kelsey, who have put up more yards in the past 30 than not. There's actually a few names in here that I kind of wanted to highlight and take a look at them specifically. Uh, T.Y. Hilton was on the under 30. In fact, he was just above Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson's in a total different kind of wide receiver, but T.Y. Hilton was kind of that guy out in Indianapolis. So I kind of wanted to see what he was doing because he did have 8,000 yards before the age of 30, but he had a hard drop after he was 30. But that hard drop also coincided with the change from Andrew Luck to Jacoby Brissett and other QBs. Now, one of the things you can look at when it comes to Terry McLaurin is Terry McLaurin had a career year with the best QB he has played with. Jaden Daniels looks like he's going to have a great sophomore season right here early in camp. So it would be something like maybe he can look like a Donald Driver who had some of his best years after the age of 30. In fact, Donald Driver had more yards after the age of 30 than he did before the age of 30. He ended up with 6,724 after the age of 30. He had 10,000, so only 4,000 yards before that. He put together some really good seasons there in Green Bay with the likes of the QBs that he was playing with, Brett Favre, then, of course, Aaron Rodgers. Why can't we get seasons like that from Terry McLaurin, who at the age of 30, Donald Driver put up 1,200 yards? It wasn't until he was 35 that he put under 1,000. Again, you might think Donald Driver was explosive, but he only had 4,000 before he was the age of 30. Couple names you're going to be familiar with if you're a longtime Redskins fan, as a couple of these guys wore those jerseys. That's Joey Galloway and Keenan McCardell. Both of these two were more productive in their 30s. Also players that came in later in age, 24 for Joey Galloway, for instance. So he had good seasons after the age of 30. Now, his first few weren't that great, but he put up numbers in years 34, 35, and 36. Now, we're really only concerned about those 30, 31, 32, 33 deal type seasons. And when I'm looking at this, you do have Keenan McCardell who put up good years in those bunches. And so what Washington has to decide and why this has been so difficult for them is because it is how much is he worth going forward. Now, I can tell you this. I have a crazy stat that I found. In fact, I'm going to have a whole segment here in Numbers Game. It's called Nathan's Absurd Stat, y'all. And today's is going to be one that I think is quite interesting. And this is dollars per yard. So these are the top 20 paid wide receivers and what they're going to be making in 2025. So ignore the number up there. It says 24. It is $2025 that they're going to be paid. And I have how much yards they had in 2024. Brandon Ayuk got injured. So it meant that the 49ers paid $80,000 for every one of his yards. Want to take a guess where Terry McLaurin is on this particular list? It astonished me because you do have the likes of a couple great wide receivers. We're going to go slow here as we go down here, but like Nico Collins, $24,000 per yard. He had just over 1,000 and he's being paid $24 million. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 1,200 yards, but because he's being paid $30 million, that was $23,000. Jamar Chase, 1,700 yards, but when you're paying the man $40 million, you expect that kind of. And he was $23,000. Justin Jefferson, 1,500 yards, $22,000 per yard is what the Minnesota Vikings were paid. Calvin Ridley, somebody who is also over 30 and still being somewhat productive with 1,017 yards. He was being paid a paltry $23 million. So he's $22,000. And then there's our man, Terry McLaurin, at the top of this list, at the bottom in this case, because Washington was only paying $20,000 almost $21,000 per yard that Terry McLaurin had. And this kind of speaks to me about the contract that he's under now is kind of a steal, right? So he needs to get bumped up into another category. Now, if he were to only get something like the 33, 32, Garrett Wilson here had 32 million, 29,000 is what they're paying for those yardage out there in New York for Garrett Wilson. So if he again has that, AJ Brown is in that ballpark, 32 million, 29,000. I think this would be still a steal for Washington, but they do want to kind of finagle this in a way where they get there. But that's your Nathan Absurd stat, y'all, for this particular numbers game. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think that that kind of spells out a little bit about how Washington's gotten Terry McLaurin on the cheap? Because to me, it seems like that might be the case. And while they'll be paying a little bit more, Terry McLaurin's still a good wide receiver, and he has good rapport with Jaden Daniels. I think you can get 3 more 1,000-yard seasons from Terry McLaurin if he's healthy. 4 if you're lucky. We'll see how that last year of the deal goes. I'm not saying Terry McLaurin is one of the greats of all time. He is a very good player. Very excited to have him here on Washington. But there's nothing about this wide receiver wall at 30 narrative that's going around that I think holds true, because there's even players playing today that have broken that. Mike Evans being one that's over 30. He is a player who, again, just year after year, just happens to get there, right? And Terry McLaurin has done that with a bunch of no names. Now he has a QB. You see the touchdowns increase. He had a ridiculous stat line when it came to passes over over a certain distance in the air, right? And he also had a 70% catch rate. 13 touchdowns. The only other players who have done that were Jamar Chase this past year, Cooper Kupp in 21, Devontae Adams in 20, Doug Baldwin in 2015, Antonio Brown 2014, Gronk in 2011, and Jordy Nelson in 2011. That's some good territory to be there with that. So stop it with the wide receiver too tall, and stop it with this idea that he's a wide receiver at 30. He's going to be horrendous. No, again, I just shared with you a bunch of wide receivers that he could be comparable to. He doesn't have to be a Steve Smith Jr. or Jerry Rice, Tim Brown. These guys are at the top of that list. A T.O. is out there as well. He just has to be, like I said, a Keenan McCardell, right? A Joey Galloway. Anquan Bolden's on that list. Muhsin Muhammad is at the bottom of that list. I do think Terry McLaurin has another 4,000 yards in him, and that is why I think that the Washington Commanders can afford to pay him an appropriate amount, because, again, at the end of that deal, that's going to feel like a steal. Let me know your thoughts, and let me find out about that nasty stat. What do you think about that here as well? And then, again, like this video, join us on Wednesday. We'll have more conversation. Camp is underway. Looking like we've got a couple sleeper picks for who might be our district diamond. We'll talk all about that on Wednesday. So join the conversation there. I'm Nathan Perry here from Ref the District. And until next time, may the numbers be in your favor. Be a fan.